The wreck of the Alderwind came ashore at Blackwater Point on a night when a lighthouse lamp had gone dark for reasons no living person could explain, and by morning, the village had already decided whose fault it was. Nathaniel Vane had been 19 that night, the lighthouse keeper's assistant, asleep at his post when he should have been awake. He never denied that part. What he denied, until his voice cracked and no one cared to hear it anymore, was that he had extinguished the lamp on purpose. His father had drowned aboard that ship, along with 11 other men, and his younger sister Margaret had simply never been found at all, her body given to the sea along with any hope of an answer. The village magistrate called it negligence. The shipping company, run by Nathaniel's step-uncle Solomon Rourke, called it something closer to murder, though he was careful never to use that word where it could be written down. Within a month, Nathaniel was gone from Blackwater Point, sent to an inn in the north with nothing but the clothes on his back and a reputation that would follow him into every town he ever tried to call home again. 14 years later, a letter reached him with a wax seal of the Rourke Shipping Company pressed into it, and inside was a single line in a clerk's careful hand. Mr. Rourke wishes to settle his accounts with you before God settles his own. Nathaniel told himself he would not go. He went anyway, because some doors, once left open, never truly close. Blackwater Point had not changed the way he expected. The harbor was smaller than memory had made it, the cottages grayer, the lighthouse itself repainted, but somehow still wearing the same tired posture against the cliffs. What had changed was the company office at the top of the hill, grown twice its former size, its windows gleaming with a prosperity that seemed, to Nathaniel's eye, entirely too comfortable for a business that had once lost a ship and 12 men in a single night. Solomon Rourke received him in a study lined with maps of shipping routes. An old man now, his hands spotted with age, but his eyes exactly as sharp as Nathaniel remembered them being when he was a boy too young to recognize sharpness for what it was. "You came," Rourke said, not rising from his chair. "I confess I wagered against it. Your letter suggested I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. You simply made the interesting one." Rourke gestured to a chair, and when Nathaniel remained standing, he only smiled, as though that too had been anticipated. "I am dying, Nathaniel. Slowly, and with considerable inconvenience to my digestion, but dying nonetheless. There are things I find myself unwilling to carry into whatever comes after." "Then tell me what happened to the lamp that night." "In time." Rourke folded his hands. "First, tell me, do you still dream of your sister?" The question struck Nathaniel harder than any accusation could have, because it was so unexpected, and because the answer was yes, though he had told almost no one that in 14 years. "She's dead," he said. "You attended the memorial yourself." "I attended a great many things I did not entirely believe in," Rourke said, and would say nothing further that evening, no matter how Nathaniel pressed him, leaving him instead with a room in the east tower of the house and a night full of questions sharp enough to keep sleep away entirely. It was near midnight when Nathaniel heard footsteps in the corridor outside his door, too light and too careful to belong to any servant going about ordinary business. He followed them down a narrow back stair he did not remember from childhood, into a part of the house clearly kept separate from the rest, plainer, colder, the sort of wing built for people the family preferred not to introduce. At the end of that corridor, a door stood slightly open, candlelight spilling from within, and a woman's voice, low and unfamiliar, humming a tune Nathaniel had not heard since he was a child sitting on a nursery floor. He pushed the door open before he had fully decided to. The woman inside turned sharply, startled, a housemaid's cap pinned over hair gone gray, far too early for her face, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because recognition does strange, slow things to the mind when it arrives somewhere it was never expected to survive. "Margaret," Nathaniel said, and the name came out broken in the middle. She did not deny it. She simply sat down very suddenly, as though her legs had stopped believing they could hold her, and said, "He told me you had stopped writing. He told me you had a new family in the north, and no wish to be reminded of Blackwater Point. He told me you were dead." Neither of those things, they would come to understand together over the following hour, had ever been true. Margaret had not drowned the night of the wreck. She had been pulled from the water by two of Rourke's own men, half drowned and unable to remember much of what had happened, and rather than return her to a grieving household, Rourke had quietly installed her in his own service under a different name, telling the village she had perished with the rest, telling Nathaniel nothing at all. A dead sister, it turned out, made a far simpler heir to manage than a living one who might one day ask why the company's insurance payment on the Alderwin had been settled with unusual speed, or why the Lighthouse logbook for that week had several pages missing, torn out so cleanly that only someone looking for them would ever notice the absence. He kept me close because he was afraid of what I might remember if I were ever left alone to think about it, Margaret said. For years, I believed I owed him my life. It took a very long time to understand that a man can save you from the water and still be the reason you were drowning in the first place. Nathaniel returned to Rourke's study before dawn, no longer a boy asking to be believed, but a man who had already found the truth without permission. "You let the village call me a murderer for 14 years, he said, to protect an insurance settlement. Rourke did not flinch, though something in his posture finally seemed to loosen, as though confession, once inevitable, had stopped being worth resisting. The Alderwin was insured for considerably more than her worth, a fact I had arranged some months before she sailed. Losing her at sea, in a storm with the lighthouse unlit, was simply the most convenient explanation available. You were young and asleep and conveniently already resented in this village for being your father's favored son over my own." His voice did not rise. It never had, Nathaniel realized, in either of their conversations, as if cruelty, delivered calmly enough, could pass for reason. "I did not extinguish that lamp myself. I paid a man who owed me a debt to do it, and I made certain that man left the county the same week you did, so that no one would ever think to ask him anything at all. And my father was aboard that ship. Your father insisted on sailing with her, against my advice, which I confess was inconvenient for my conscience, though not inconvenient enough to change my plans." Rourke met his eyes without apology. "I'm telling you this now because I find, at the end of a life, that unspent guilt is a poor sort of currency. I would rather spend it honestly than carry it further." Nathaniel did not raise his hand against the old man, though the wanting was there, sharp and immediate. He did something that cost him more effort and would, he suspected, matter a great deal longer. He rode that same morning to the county magistrate with Margaret at his side, presented the torn logbook pages Rourke had kept, out of vanity or guilt, locked in his own desk rather than destroyed, and watched as 14 years of settled village opinion began, slowly and reluctantly, to come undone. Solomon Rourke did not die peacefully in his own bed as he had perhaps imagined he would. He lived long enough to stand before the same magistrate who had once condemned Nathaniel without a single question asked, and to hear a very different judgment read aloud in a courtroom that had finally been given reason to ask questions of its own. He would spend whatever remained of his life within the walls of a debtor's prison converted for older, gentler forms of confinement, his shipping company dismantled and its accounts opened at last to daylight. Nathaniel and Margaret stayed in Blackwater Point through that winter, in their father's old cottage near the harbor, which had stood empty and unclaimed for 14 years because no one else had dared to occupy a dead man's house. Together they climbed the Lighthouse stairs on the anniversary of the wreck, and lit the lamp themselves, and stood watching its beams sweep out across the Blackwater, where their father and 11 other men had gone under a darkness that should never have been allowed to fall. Do you think the sea remembers who was truly responsible? Margaret asked. I don't think the sea remembers anything, Nathaniel said. But the village will now, and that will have to be enough. Below them, the light kept turning, steady and unbroken, out over water that had kept its secrets far longer than it ever should have been allowed to.